Some battles never make the history books, yet their outcomes shaped the fate of empires. In the shadows of forgotten campaigns lie decisions and sacrifices that quietly determined the world's future. History often hides its most decisive moments in shadows, and the British Empire's fate was shaped as much by quiet decisions as by celebrated victories. A quiet shadow often falls over the grand narratives of empire, lingering in places that history has chosen to overlook. The British Empire, expansive and intricate, did not rise solely on the back of celebrated victories or legendary commanders. Its true shape and enduring influence were often forged in campaigns that received little attention, campaigns that were strategically critical yet slipped quietly from the public memory. These forgotten fronts, dispersed across continents and oceans, carried decisions with consequences far beyond their immediate outcomes. From remote outposts in Africa to the arid stretches of the Middle East, each engagement demanded careful planning, improvisation, and an acceptance of uncertainty. The men who served there were tasked with navigating environments that challenged their endurance, their morale, and their understanding of warfare itself. This was not about glory. It was about maintaining influence, securing trade, and managing complex alliances in regions where a single misstep could unravel years of diplomatic effort. The nature of these campaigns meant that recognition was scarce, and yet the impact was profound, shaping the strategies and doctrines that would govern future conflicts. In exploring these overlooked theaters, one begins to see patterns of command, resource allocation, and decision-making that illustrate the empire's adaptability and foresight. Leadership often relied on careful intelligence gathering, assessment of local conditions, and the capacity to balance immediate tactical needs with long-term strategic objectives. Such circumstances demanded a quiet resilience, a willingness to make choices under conditions of ambiguity, and a deep understanding of both terrain and human factors. The interplay between commanders' intentions and the realities on the ground frequently determined whether a campaign succeeded, failed, or merely achieved partial objectives that would echo subtly in later operations. Within these marginal spaces of history, the empire tested not just its military capabilities, but its logistical ingenuity, its ability to motivate and sustain troops, and its skill in navigating complex political landscapes. Soldiers and officers alike confronted not only external opposition, but also the strains of distance from home, scarcity of resources, and the pressure to act decisively when every option carried risk. The decisions made, and sometimes deferred, in these environments reveal a depth of strategic thinking that is often invisible in broader historical accounts, yet indispensable for understanding how the empire maintained coherence across such vast territories. Each campaign, however small in scale or obscure in detail, contributed to a framework of operational knowledge and strategic precedent that would inform subsequent engagements and influence the empire's global posture. It is in the tension between these small, largely unseen conflicts and their outsized consequences that the narrative of the empire's true defining moments begins to emerge. The audience, attuned to strategy and subtle shifts in historical momentum, can appreciate how these overlooked efforts required patience, analytical rigor, and a capacity to act under uncertainty. In this calm, reflective space, one perceives the contours of history not as a series of dramatic events, but as a network of decisions, each with its own weight and eventual impact. By tracing these forgotten campaigns, we uncover the quiet, deliberate processes that shaped outcomes far beyond the immediate battlefield, revealing the intricate architecture behind imperial dominance. Understanding these moments fosters a respect for the complexity of command and the nuanced ways in which influence was maintained. The listener, invited to contemplate the interplay of strategy, geography, and human endurance, begins to perceive the empire not merely as a collection of victories, but as an intricate system guided by choices whose ramifications were felt across decades. The calm reflection this evokes encourages deep engagement, allowing the audience to follow the careful logic, the measured risks, and the steady accumulation of consequences that defined these neglected chapters of history. Even in obscurity, these campaigns quietly shaped the fate of an empire, their consequences waiting to be discovered. In the shadows of grand empires, every decision carried weight far beyond the immediate battlefield. Across distant lands, the British Empire confronted challenges that demanded more than brute force. They required careful calculation, foresight, and an understanding of the fragile balance of power. Every deployment, every maneuver was influenced not only by the enemy before them, but by a network of alliances, local politics, and the logistical realities of moving men and supplies across great distances. These campaigns, often underreported, reveal how strategy was shaped not in isolation, but through a constant negotiation between opportunity and constraint. Leaders faced the delicate task of weighing potential gains against risks that could jeopardize entire regions of imperial control. The pressing question in each scenario was rarely simple: what actions would secure lasting influence, and which compromises were acceptable to maintain stability? Commanders relied on intelligence from local informants, scouts, and even intercepted communications, piecing together a picture of the terrain, the disposition of opposing forces, and the morale of their own troops. Decisions were often provisional, with flexibility as important as planning. The capacity to adapt, to pivot as circumstances evolved, became a hallmark of campaigns that succeeded where others faltered. In considering why these campaigns were overlooked, it becomes clear that they were not always decisive in isolation. Their significance lay in how they influenced subsequent operations, established precedent, and preserved strategic options for the empire. By maintaining presence in seemingly peripheral theaters, British commanders could project power, protect trade routes, and influence local politics without committing overwhelming forces. Yet such restraint required discipline and confidence, for hesitation or misjudgment could quickly escalate into setbacks. Each choice, however subtle, carried a weight that the men in the field keenly felt. Officers had to anticipate not only the immediate consequences of a skirmish, but also the broader implications for supply lines, local allegiances, and political stability. They navigated not only physical terrain, but the complex social and economic landscapes of the regions they entered, understanding that their actions would ripple far beyond the battlefield. The audience, attentive to the intricacies of military strategy, is invited to consider the subtle interplay of planning, anticipation, and adaptation that defined these campaigns. By focusing on choices and constraints, rather than solely on victories or losses, the narrative emphasizes the intellectual rigor required of commanders and the quiet determination of the men who executed their orders. This section encourages reflection on the less visible dimensions of warfare, the negotiation between ambition and prudence, the calculation of risk, and the discipline needed to sustain operations over time. Listeners gain insight into the ways strategy unfolds gradually, often without immediate recognition, and how success frequently derives from patience as much as from action. Beyond logistics and strategy, the human element remained ever present. Troops confronted environmental challenges, from harsh climates to disease, requiring commanders to balance tactical objectives with the well-being of their men. Morale, discipline, and cohesion were constant concerns, influencing every decision from marching orders to engagement tactics. Leaders who grasped these realities and made adjustments accordingly often succeeded where more rigid approaches failed. The careful orchestration of resources, personnel, and information defined these campaigns, shaping outcomes that would influence broader imperial policy. Through this lens, the forgotten campaigns reveal themselves as exercises in strategic foresight, blending anticipation, adaptability, and human judgment. The audience, seeking clarity and calm engagement, can appreciate the deliberate pace and thoughtful calculation underpinning each movement. The narrative emphasizes that what may appear minor or peripheral often holds the key to sustained influence, underscoring the complexity and subtlety of maintaining an empire. In the balance between risk and restraint, these campaigns quietly determined the empire's ability to endure, leaving lessons only discernible to those willing to observe carefully. Behind every overlooked battle lies a story of individuals whose choices shaped outcomes far beyond their immediate reach. In these quiet theaters of conflict, the human element became as critical as strategy itself. Officers and soldiers carried the weight of decisions that could influence not only the course of a campaign, but the broader fortunes of the empire. Letters, journals, and reports reveal a complex web of thought, emotion, and responsibility guiding each action. These men confronted environments that tested their endurance, judgment, and adaptability. They navigated unfamiliar terrain, unpredictable weather, and the constant uncertainty of engagement, all while maintaining discipline and focus under immense pressure. The audience is invited to reflect on the resilience and determination required to operate effectively in circumstances where recognition was scarce and stakes were often invisible to the wider world. Commanders faced dilemmas that demanded both moral and tactical judgment. They needed to balance immediate objectives with long-term strategic consequences, weighing the cost of casualties, the reliability of local allies, and the broader implications of failure or success. Each decision was layered with uncertainty. Intelligence was incomplete, communication was limited, and conditions could shift rapidly. Yet within this ambiguity, leaders demonstrated ingenuity and foresight, drawing upon experience, observation, and the counsel of trusted subordinates. The men under their command internalized these choices, performing tasks that demanded not only skill, but a quiet courage that rarely received public acknowledgement. Through these campaigns, ordinary soldiers often became linchpins of strategic success. Their discipline, perseverance, and adaptability under difficult conditions allowed commanders to execute complex maneuvers and maintain operational momentum. The audience, attuned to the subtleties of human endurance and leadership, gains an understanding of the layers of responsibility that existed behind every tactical decision. The focus here is not on dramatic heroics, but on measured, sustained action that reflects both professional competence and personal resilience. The interpersonal dynamics within these units also played a crucial role. Relationships between officers and their men, the trust developed through shared hardship, and the discipline required to function cohesively under stress all influenced the effectiveness of operations. Even minor lapses or successes could have disproportionate effects, shaping the morale, efficiency, and cohesion of a force over extended periods. Observing these interactions, listeners can appreciate the complex balance between authority and cooperation, leadership and followership, which determined how effectively objectives were achieved. In addition to physical and organizational challenges, cultural and political awareness often guided decision-making. Officers needed to understand local customs, alliances, and rivalries, as these factors could decisively affect cooperation, intelligence gathering, and even the interpretation of enemy intentions. The capacity to adapt leadership style and operational planning to the surrounding context demonstrates the nuanced human judgment essential to success in these campaigns. The audience experiences a calm, reflective engagement, recognizing that these campaigns were as much about understanding people and systems as about maneuvering troops. By examining the choices and experiences of individuals, the narrative reveals the quiet heroism embedded in disciplined decision-making, careful planning, and the measured execution of orders. The audience is encouraged to appreciate the subtleties of command, the interplay of personal judgment with broader strategic concerns, and the enduring impact of these largely invisible contributions. This reflection reinforces both the intellectual and emotional engagement of the listener, offering insight into how individuals shaped the empire's course through diligence, judgment, and resilience. Even without recognition, the quiet courage and careful decisions of these men ensured that the empire's forgotten campaigns left a lasting imprint on history. History often turns on moments so subtle that only careful observation reveals their true significance. Within these overlooked campaigns, certain battles and maneuvers, though not widely remembered, proved pivotal in shaping the trajectory of the empire. These moments demanded precise judgment under pressure, requiring commanders to weigh immediate outcomes against long-term strategic consequences. Every choice, where to deploy forces, when to advance, and when to hold, carried implications that could ripple far beyond the battlefield. Intelligence was incomplete, terrain was unpredictable, and the coordination of men and resources presented continual challenges. Yet, it was within these constraints that subtle brilliance emerged, revealing how thoughtful decision-making could yield disproportionate results. The audience, attuned to the nuances of strategy and consequence, begins to understand that these campaigns were laboratories for innovation, testing the Empire's capacity to adapt and respond to complex situations. Commanders often relied on an intricate balance between risk and restraint. Small victories could preserve strategic positions or secure vital supply routes, while misjudgments could unravel months of effort. Success required not only tactical skill, but also a nuanced understanding of timing, environment, and the disposition of both allies and adversaries. Troops executed complex maneuvers under these constraints, their discipline and reliability ensuring that plans, however delicate, could be carried out effectively. The audience is invited to appreciate the calm deliberation underlying these operations, observing how preparation, patience, and adaptability allowed commanders to influence outcomes that might otherwise have seemed dictated by chance or circumstance. In some cases, battles that appeared minor to contemporary observers held disproportionate consequences. The occupation of a key pass, the defense of a vulnerable supply depot, or the negotiation of a local alliance could shift the balance in an entire region. Each engagement required careful calculation, as resources were limited and the margin for error was narrow. Commanders needed to anticipate both immediate tactical reactions and broader strategic responses, weighing how each decision would affect the campaign's progression. Listeners can sense the quiet tension inherent in these choices, understanding that the impact of even a single maneuver could extend far beyond the immediate action, influencing subsequent operations and shaping Imperial policy. The human element remained central to these pivotal moments. Officers relied on the competence, morale, and adaptability of their men to execute plans with precision. Troops faced not only the physical demands of combat, but also the mental challenge of operating under uncertainty, maintaining focus, and responding to rapidly changing circumstances. The audience is encouraged to recognize the interdependence of leadership and execution, where success often depended as much on the disciplined performance of soldiers as on the ingenuity of commanders. This calm reflection highlights the intelligence and commitment required to sustain operations across dispersed and challenging theaters. Through these turning points, the Empire tested both its capacity for strategic foresight and its ability to adapt in real time. Each subtle decision, carefully weighed and executed, contributed to the broader architecture of imperial power. Listeners, seeking depth and clarity, can observe how the accumulation of small, deliberate choices defined the outcomes of campaigns, demonstrating that history's most enduring moments often arise from quiet, calculated judgment rather than dramatic spectacle. The focus on thoughtful execution, incremental advantage, and adaptive planning reinforces the audience's appreciation for the disciplined, intellectual side of warfare, creating sustained engagement and reflection. In these subtle but decisive moments, the Empire's strength was measured not by bold gestures alone, but by the quiet precision of carefully considered choices. Hook. The consequences of forgotten campaigns often outlast the memory of the battles themselves. As these overlooked engagements concluded, their impact resonated far beyond the immediate theaters of operation, shaping both policy and perception within the Empire. Decisions made in the field influenced supply networks, diplomatic relations, and the allocation of future resources, creating ripples that extended across continents. Commanders had to balance the outcomes of these campaigns against broader strategic imperatives, understanding that even minor victories or setbacks could alter the trajectory of imperial influence. The audience is invited to consider the quiet weight of these choices, recognizing that success was measured not only in territorial gains, but in the maintenance of stability, authority, and strategic advantage. This reflection encourages calm engagement, emphasizing the intellectual and organizational demands of sustained military presence in diverse and challenging environments. Strategic learning was a central consequence of these operations. Commanders documented successes, failures, and unexpected outcomes, forming a body of knowledge that informed future campaigns. Adaptations in logistics, troop deployment, and coordination were implemented based on lessons learned, demonstrating the empire's capacity for reflection and improvement. Even when campaigns themselves faded from public attention, their contributions to institutional memory endured, guiding decisions in subsequent conflicts. The audience, attuned to the patterns and consequences of military planning, can appreciate how these subtle adjustments influenced the empire's broader posture, reinforcing the notion that long-term success depended on careful observation and deliberate adaptation rather than mere battlefield heroics. Human factors also played a significant role in shaping outcomes. Morale, cohesion, and leadership within units affected operational effectiveness, with attentive commanders using experience and judgment to sustain performance under trying conditions. The cultivation of trust, discipline, and initiative allowed forces to operate effectively despite uncertainty, limited resources, and unfamiliar terrain. Listeners are invited to engage with these aspects, understanding that the endurance and judgment of individual soldiers and officers were integral to the empire's ability to maintain influence over distant regions. By emphasizing the interplay of human resilience and strategic planning, the narrative maintains calm, reflective pacing while fostering deeper appreciation of the complexities involved. Political and diplomatic consequences were equally significant. Engagements in peripheral theaters often affected local alliances, rivalries, and perceptions of British authority. Success or failure could determine the willingness of local rulers to cooperate, the stability of trade routes, or the likelihood of rebellion. Commanders needed to navigate these dimensions carefully, balancing tactical decisions with awareness of wider political ramifications. The audience gains insight into the sophisticated judgment required to harmonize military objectives with regional realities, highlighting the empire's attentiveness to both immediate and long-term outcomes. Over time, the cumulative effects of these campaigns shaped doctrine and policy. Operational lessons were translated into procedures, influencing troop training, supply organization, and strategic planning. The empire's ability to learn from past campaigns, even those largely forgotten by history, strengthened its adaptability and resilience. Listeners attuned to thoughtful analysis can perceive how subtle shifts in approach, grounded in reflection and careful evaluation, allowed the empire to maintain coherence and influence across vast, diverse territories. These processes reveal that the empire's enduring power depended as much on reflection, adaptation, and sustained execution as on the moments of direct engagement. Rehook. The quiet influence of these campaigns demonstrates that the true measure of power lies not in immediate triumph, but in the enduring lessons they leave behind. Some chapters of history remain hidden, yet their impact reverberates through time, shaping the world in ways rarely acknowledged. In the final consideration of these forgotten campaigns, the long-term resonance of their outcomes becomes clear. The British Empire, vast and dispersed, relied on the accumulation of subtle victories and prudent decisions to sustain its global influence. Each operation, no matter how obscure, contributed to a foundation of strategic knowledge, demonstrating how careful planning, disciplined execution, and adaptive leadership combine to preserve authority across continents. The men and officers who operated in these marginal theaters exhibited resilience and judgment that allowed the empire to navigate complexity, uncertainty, and the unforeseen consequences of action or inaction. Their experiences illustrate that history is as much constructed through quiet determination and methodical assessment as it is through celebrated battles and dramatic turning points. These campaigns also reveal the nuanced interplay between local conditions and imperial objectives. Commanders needed to understand the social, economic, and political landscape of the regions in which they operated, adjusting tactics to align with shifting circumstances. The ability to anticipate challenges, negotiate alliances, and respond to evolving threats was crucial. Through sustained observation, measured judgment, and careful coordination, they were able to achieve objectives that strengthened the empire's position without provoking unnecessary conflict or resource strain. Listeners are invited to contemplate how this blend of strategic foresight and adaptive management allowed the empire to endure and expand even in the absence of public acclaim or historical recognition. The human element remained central to these enduring outcomes. Troops faced fatigue, isolation, and environmental hazards, relying on leadership that combined authority with insight into human endurance. Officers balanced the tactical demands of their campaigns with the well-being and morale of their men, ensuring that forces remained cohesive and responsive. These considerations often determined the difference between sustained success and costly failure, highlighting the quiet, disciplined execution required to maintain operational effectiveness. For the audience, understanding these factors provides a calm, reflective appreciation for the subtle mechanisms through which empires endure, emphasizing that leadership and resilience are inseparable from strategic success. Over time, the cumulative lessons from these forgotten campaigns informed broader military practice and imperial policy. Innovations in logistics, communication, and coordination were integrated into subsequent operations, demonstrating the empire's capacity to learn from experience. Even in theaters that escaped popular memory, the intelligence gathered, the methods tested, and the decisions made had enduring consequences, shaping both doctrine and the practical capabilities of future forces. The audience gains insight into the layered complexity of historical influence, recognizing that the impact of these campaigns was both immediate and generational, extending beyond the confines of any single engagement. Reflecting on the broader significance, it becomes apparent that the strength of the empire was built as much on deliberate, incremental decision-making as on grand victories. The persistence of careful planning, the disciplined execution of orders, and the continual adaptation to local and global conditions defined the empire's ability to survive and thrive. Listeners are encouraged to perceive the interdependence of strategy, human judgment, and long-term consequence, appreciating the invisible scaffolding that underpinned imperial authority. The calm, immersive narration invites the audience to follow the logic of historical development, understanding how each choice, however small or forgotten, contributed to the enduring architecture of power. Ultimately, the forgotten campaigns that shaped the British Empire reveal a world where subtlety, patience, and foresight were as decisive as courage or force. The disciplined interplay between strategy, leadership, and circumstance created a foundation that allowed the empire to maintain coherence across continents and decades. For the audience, the lesson is clear. History's lasting influence is often forged in the quiet, deliberate actions of those who navigate uncertainty with skill and resolve. In recognizing these campaigns, one gains not only insight into military history, but also a deeper appreciation for the measured, enduring qualities that sustain human enterprise on a global scale.